Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Unseen Wisdom. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss one of our deep dives. Today, we're going to be tackling a really tricky topic, infrastructure in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. And you flagged some serious concerns in your notes, particularly around a recent interview Martin Meyer, who is the MEC for Public Works and Infrastructure, gave on SABC News.
Yeah, it's a fascinating case study, especially for someone like you who's interested in the intersection of politics and development and, well, let's be honest, potential scandals.
Okay, so right off the bat, you highlighted this potential tender scandal. 29 tenders worth over R1 billion, all going to one consulting company. That's not just a red flag, that's a whole parade of red flags. What do you make of that?
It's certainly eyebrow-raising. I mean, on the surface, it just reeks of potential corruption. But as we dig deeper, I think it's crucial to examine the systemic issues that might have allowed this to happen. For example, how robust are the bid adjudication committees in KwaZulu-Natal? And were there any conflicts of interest that weren't properly disclosed?
All right, so maybe it's less about one bad apple and more about a whole orchard that needs some attention. Now, Meyer has been pretty quick to act, suspending the initial official involved within 60 days. Is that standard procedure, or is he trying to get ahead of the curve here?
That speed is definitely noteworthy. It suggests a desire to be seen as taking decisive action, which, let's face it, is important in a situation this politically charged. But it also begs the question, why wasn't this caught earlier? Were there warning signs that were ignored? And what about the other senior officials and those bid adjudication committees? Are they being investigated as thoroughly?
And here's another thing that struck me as odd. They haven't revealed the name of the company involved. Meyer cites the ongoing investigation, but isn't transparency crucial in a case like this?
It's a classic dilemma, isn't it? On the one hand, the public has a right to know who might be benefiting from these potentially irregular tenders. On the other hand, prematurely releasing the company's name could compromise the investigation or even lead to legal complications. It's a tightrope walk between accountability and due process.
And to add to the intrigue, it seems that this company isn't actually providing any services right now.
Which, given the scrutiny on individual contracts, makes sense. Halting their operations might be a precautionary measure to avoid any further accusations of impropriety while the investigations are ongoing.
Now, this whole situation brings us to a broader point, that Meyer himself raises the overdependence on consultants across government departments. And he even questions the quality of the work being done by this particular company. What's your take on that?
I think Meyer is tapping into a very valid concern. It's tempting for governments to rely on consultants, especially for specialized expertise. But when that reliance becomes excessive, it can lead to a whole host of problems, like constantly outsourcing your thinking. You never develop the internal capacity to solve problems yourself.
And I imagine it gets pretty expensive, too.
Absolutely. It becomes a vicious cycle. You don't develop in-house expertise, so you keep shelling out money for external consultants, which further depletes your resources. And remember, this isn't a new concern. The Auditor General has been flagging this reliance on consultants for years, pointing out the inflated costs and the lack of internal capacity building. So it's clearly a systemic issue that needs addressing.
So what's the solution? Meyer is proposing an infrastructure advisory body within the department, made up of experts from various fields. Do you think that's a step in the right direction?
It's certainly an interesting idea, and I think done correctly, it could address some of the concerns we've been discussing. By building a pool of in-house expertise, the department could potentially save money, have better control over the quality of work, and perhaps most importantly, retain that knowledge within the organization. But the key will be to ensure that this body is genuinely independent and can operate without undue influence from political or other interests.
So it's not just about creating another layer of bureaucracy, but about fostering a culture of expertise and critical thinking within the department itself.
Precisely. It's about investing in long-term solutions rather than quick fixes, because, let's be honest, quick fixes often lead to more problems down the line.
Speaking of long-term problems, let's shift gears to something you've highlighted in your notes, climate change. The recent heavy rains in Durban were devastating, and Meyer brought up the concept of flood defenses, something that South Africa seems to be lacking. Why is that?
Well, historically, South Africa's approach to disaster management has been reactive rather than proactive. They tend to focus on rebuilding after the damage is done instead of investing in preventative measures. And that's especially concerning in the context of climate change, where extreme weather events are becoming more frequent and intense.
It's a bit like constantly putting out fires instead of fireproofing the building in the first place. And it seems like they often rebuild in the exact same vulnerable locations, almost guaranteeing future damage.
Exactly, and that's where the lack of in-house expertise becomes even more glaring. Imagine if the department had engineers specializing in climate-resilient design. Perhaps we would see more robust and sustainable infrastructure in those flood-prone areas.
Instead of being stuck in this cycle of damage and repair, Meyer also touched on alternative building materials, specifically mentioning hemp bricks. What other innovative green building solutions are out there?
There's a whole world of exciting possibilities emerging, from recycled and bio-based materials to smart technologies that optimize energy and water use. We're seeing a real shift towards sustainable construction.
And maybe even some solutions we haven't even thought of yet.
Absolutely. That's the beauty of innovation. It's constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
Speaking of innovation, Meyer talked about revitalizing derelict buildings, specifically mentioning West Point Lodge and Palm Beach Hotel. His plan is to invite the private sector to propose ideas for these properties. What do you think of that approach?
It's a pragmatic approach, acknowledging that the government may not always have the most innovative solutions. Tapping into the private sector's creativity and resources could be a win-win, revitalizing neglected properties while potentially generating economic activity and community benefits.
But how do you ensure fairness and transparency in this process?
Right.
It's easy to see how this kind of open call for proposals could become a breeding ground for favoritism or even corruption.
That's a valid concern. Meyer emphasized that there will be safeguards in place, such as open bids, community benefit clauses, and this is key audio and video recordings of all tender meetings.
So everything's out in the open, no backroom deals.
That's the idea. It's about fostering accountability and demonstrating that the selection process is fair and impartial. But of course, the devil is always in the details. How these safeguards are implemented and enforced will ultimately determine the success of this approach.
This idea of bringing in the private sector reminds me of the larger discussion around public-private partnerships, or PPPs. How do you see those playing out in addressing South Africa's infrastructure needs, especially considering some past challenges?
PPPs have had a mixed track record in South Africa. They can be effective, but there have been cases like the King Shaka International Airport and the new government precinct building where the complexities of these partnerships led to delays and cost overruns. So it's not a magic bullet. It requires careful planning, transparent governance, and a shared vision between the public and private sectors to be successful.
Okay, so PPPs are a potential tool, but not a guaranteed solution. Let's move on to a different kind of challenge, the precarious situation of Itala Bank. Meyer acknowledged that the Democratic Alliance had raised concerns about the bank's operations as far back as 2010, and now it's facing a potential liquidation threat from the Prudential Authority. What are the potential consequences if Itala Bank collapses?
The consequences could be devastating, especially for disadvantaged communities. Itala Bank has played a crucial role in providing access to capital for small businesses and individuals who might not qualify for traditional loans. Its collapse would leave a significant gap in the financial landscape, potentially exacerbating economic inequalities.
Meyer did express a strong commitment to saving the bank. What are some of the strategies that could be employed to achieve that?
There are several options on the table, from recapitalization efforts to exploring potential mergers or acquisitions. The key will be swift and decisive action to restore confidence in the bank and ensure its long-term viability. But it's also a good moment to reevaluate how financial institutions serve marginalized communities. Perhaps exploring microfinance initiatives, community-owned banks, or alternative lending models could be part of the solution.
It's like the Itala Bank situation is a symptom of a larger systemic issue: access to capital for those who need it most.
Exactly. And solving it requires not just rescuing one bank, but rethinking how we approach financial inclusion in South Africa.
This deep dive has already revealed a lot of complex and interconnected issues. But there's one final thread I want to pull on before we move to part two: the role of citizens in all of this. Both the tender scandal and the Itala Bank situation highlight the importance of listening to opposition voices and taking early warning seriously. In both cases, ignoring those red flags seems to have exacerbated the problems.
Absolutely. Openness to criticism, whether from opposition parties, civil society, or even internal dissent, is crucial for good governance. It allows for course correction and prevents minor issues from snowballing into major crises.
So it's not just about having the right policies in place, but about creating a culture of accountability and responsiveness within the government itself.
Precisely. Because ultimately, good governance is about serving the people, not just clinging to power.
Well, there's clearly a lot more to unpack here. We'll be back after a short break to delve deeper into potential solutions and the role of citizen engagement. Stay tuned.
You know, it's interesting, we've been talking about these large-scale issues, but I think it's important to remember that infrastructure ultimately impacts people's daily lives.
Absolutely. It's about more than just bridges and buildings. It's about creating a society that works for everyone.
Exactly. And that's why citizen engagement is so crucial. Let's take Meyer's vision for revitalizing derelict buildings, for instance. Bringing in the private sector is one thing, but how do we ensure that those projects actually benefit the community and avoid the pitfalls we've seen in the past?
You've hit on a key point there. From your perspective, what are the safeguards that need to be in place?
Well, transparency is paramount. Open forums where citizens can voice their concerns, provide input on proposals, and hold decision makers accountable are essential. It's about more than just choosing the flashiest proposal. It's about evaluating bids based on factors like job creation, affordable housing, and environmental sustainability. It's about balancing economic development with social and environmental responsibility.
So it's almost like crowdsourcing solutions, but with a focus on what actually benefits the people living there.
That's a great way to put it. And citizen participation shouldn't end with the selection process. Ongoing monitoring and feedback mechanisms are needed to ensure projects stay aligned with community needs.
It's about building trust and making sure people feel like they have a genuine stake in these projects.
Precisely. Now let's circle back to Meyer's plan to establish that infrastructure advisory body within the department. It's a good start toward building internal expertise, but what else can be done to ensure its success?
That's a great question. What do you think based on your analysis of this situation?
I think this body needs to be outward-looking. Collaboration with universities, research institutions, and even experienced professionals from the private sector can enrich their knowledge base. It's about creating a network of expertise, drawing on the best minds from various sectors.
So it's about breaking down those silos and fostering a more collaborative approach to infrastructure development.
Exactly. And let's not forget about the existing workforce. Investing in training programs for government employees can ensure knowledge transfer and long-term capacity building within the department.
It's about empowering those who are already on the ground and giving them the tools they need to succeed.
You got it. And this ties into something we touched on earlier, green building solutions. Meyer mentioned hemp bricks, but what other innovative technologies or materials are out there that South Africa could be exploring?
It seems like there's a real opportunity here for South Africa to become a leader in sustainable infrastructure.
Absolutely. They could leapfrog into a more sustainable future by researching and implementing innovative materials and technologies. And it's not just about replicating what's been done elsewhere, it's about thinking outside the concrete box, exploring locally sourced, eco-friendly alternatives that reduce carbon footprint and create resilience.
And this is where that collaboration we talked about becomes even more important. Connecting with researchers, innovators, and entrepreneurs around the world can accelerate the adoption of these new solutions.
Couldn't agree more. Now let's shift our focus to a different kind of infrastructure, financial infrastructure. The Itala Bank situation highlights the crucial issue of access to capital for disadvantaged communities.
It's a stark reminder that infrastructure isn't just about physical structures. It's about creating systems that support economic opportunity and social mobility.
Precisely. Saving Itala Bank is important, but it's also an opportunity to reevaluate how financial institutions serve marginalized communities. Perhaps exploring microfinance initiatives, community-owned banks, or alternative lending models could be part of the solution. We need solutions that empower communities, foster entrepreneurship, and create a more inclusive financial system.
So it's about addressing the root causes of financial exclusion, not just treating the symptoms.
Exactly. It's about creating a system where everyone has a fair chance to succeed, regardless of their background or circumstances.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground, but I think the underlying message is clear transparency, accountability, long-term thinking, and citizen engagement are paramount when it comes to infrastructure development.
I couldn't have said it better myself. It's not just about bricks and mortar. It's about building a future that is sustainable, equitable, and resilient for all. And that requires a fundamental shift in mindset, a recognition that infrastructure is not just a technical issue, but a social and political one as well.
And that brings us to a question I think is worth pondering as we wrap up this part of our deep dive.
I'm all ears.
How can citizens become more involved in shaping infrastructure decisions that directly impact their lives? Because it's clear that their voices need to be heard.
It's a crucial question that goes beyond simply casting a vote every few years. It's about active citizenship, about being informed, engaged, and empowered to make a difference. But how do we translate that into concrete action? We'll explore that in part 3 of our deep dive. Stay tuned.
So we've established that citizen engagement is crucial for successful and equitable infrastructure development. But I think the question on everyone's mind is, what does that actually look like in practice?
It's all about taking those big ideas and translating them into concrete actions. For someone like you who's clearly passionate about this, it starts with staying informed. Attending community meetings, reading local news, following relevant organizations. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to navigating the complexities of infrastructure projects.
That makes sense. I mean, we're bombarded with information these days. Knowing where to find reliable sources and how to filter through the noise is essential.
Absolutely. Once you have that foundation of knowledge, it's about making your voice heard. Writing to your elected officials, engaging in public consultations, participating in online forums. Don't underestimate the power of citizen advocacy. It can shape policies, influence decisions, and hold those in power accountable.
It's about making sure those in power actually represent our needs and interests, not just their own agendas.
Exactly. And don't forget about the power of grassroots action. Supporting local initiatives that align with your values can make a real difference. Volunteer your time, donate to relevant causes, or even start your own community projects. It's about taking ownership of your community and actively shaping the future you want to see.
It's about being proactive, not just reactive. And not being afraid to challenge the status quo when necessary.
Absolutely. Don't be afraid to ask tough questions, propose alternative solutions, and demand transparency. Constructive criticism is vital for progress. Remember, infrastructure development should be a collaborative process, a partnership between the government, the private sector, and most importantly, the people.
It's about building a future where everyone has a voice and everyone benefits from sustainable and equitable infrastructure.
Well said. Let's turn those challenges into opportunities and create a brighter future for KwaZulu-Natal and beyond.
On that inspiring note, I want to thank you for joining me today for this deep dive. It's been a fascinating and thought-provoking conversation.
The pleasure was all mine. Always enjoy these deep dives with you.
And to all our listeners out there, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to The Unseen Wisdom for more insights into complex topics. Until next time, stay curious.